Hey everyone, welcome to the booth at Createx Colors. I'm Chris Arpin, and today we're going to talk about how to reduce our candy2o for airbrush and spray gun use. So we're going to start with the airbrush. The airbrush I'm going to use in this demo is my Eclipse CS. It's a .35. This is my workhorse airbrush that I use quite a bit. The .35 seems to be pretty common, so that's kind of a good baseline for the video. So we're going to start, get right into it with our 40-30 balancing clear. So that'll be the first one I mix. So we're going to do 1-to-1 with our 40-30 and our Cara blue candy. Always give these a good shake. If there's a marble in it, give it a good shake. Make sure it's mixed up. I'm going to go, again, 1-to-1. So 1 part 40-30. To 1 part Cara blue candy. And then I'm going to go 10% with our 40-11 reducer. So that's 1-to-1. And it's about 1 ounce of paint here, so it's really, for the 40-11, it's just a splash. It's just not very much. So to mix this up, we recommend mixing about 1 minute, and then we recommend letting it sit for about 10 minutes to really let everything emulsify and get the candy acclimated and marry everything together. So while we're waiting for that to happen, I'm going to mix our UVLS clear, our gloss clear, the 40-50. So these guys can both hang out at the same time. So I'll show you how that looks. It's going to be the same thing. We're going to do 1-to-1 with our UVLS clear here, the 40-50. So I'm going to go 1 part 40-50. To 1 part candy2o. And I'm going to reduce it the same. I'm going to do 10% reduction. And you'll see that the UVLS, the 40-50, is a bit thicker. It's almost twice the viscosity of the 40-30. But even at 10%, it still flows pretty good through an airbrush. So what we're going to do is show you the difference. You see my hand speed's probably going to be a little bit slower, but it's not terrible if you have to reduce another 5%. So you go from 10 to 15, you can go from 15 to 20. With our airbrush paint line, we're not really stuck to a baseline or you have to be at 10%. If you have to go to 20%, it's okay. If you have to go 15%, again, depending on the airbrush that you're using, you're spraying, what it is that you're spraying. So there's really no set standard that we have. Is saying you can't over reduce it to a certain extent, where once we marry to the spray gun, we're a little more adamant on a 10% reduction. We want everything to be consistent. Okay, so I'm going to let this sit, and we're going to start painting. Okay, we're back. It's been about 10 minutes. The 40-50 mix is ready to go, and so is the 40-30. So we're going to start with the 40-30. I'm going to get it in the airbrush, and you guys can see what this is going to look like. We're ready to spray. This is the 40-30. I'm just going to spray a couple lines and do a little bit of a fade. You guys can see what that looks like. Again, the whole deal with the candy is being able to work in light coats and gradually build up your color. So for the airbrush, the 40-30 is great. The only real difference is once we go into the big gun, it's a little more dramatic of a difference. So you can see I can build color nice, I can get a nice fade, it's gradual, dries pretty fast, which is really what initially the 40-30 was designed for, was the carrier for this candy2o system. So you can see I was able to move pretty fast. You can pull lines relatively quick. It moves nice. It is candy, so it is a little bit thinner in viscosity, so that's really not a problem. The only difference really now when we go to the 40-50 is going to be the viscosity, the thickness. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit slower, but you can adjust that with the 40-11 reducer. So instead of 10%, maybe you have to go to 15. But remember, I did 10% in both so you guys can see the difference. It's probably going to be just a little bit slower than I was able to move with the 40-30. Okay, so I cleaned out my gun. I'm going to have 40-50 in it right now. I'm going to spray the same thing, and you guys can see the difference side by side. You can see it is a little bit slower. You can feel it in the airbrush. It has a little bit heavier feel to it in terms of how it flows. The one difference you can see is I'm able to put it on a little bit heavier each coat. I can build color a little bit faster, but again, we recommend, you know, you're building up your color and slower coats, but I can't move as fast as the 40-30. It is a little bit slower, but like I said, you can adjust that with your reducer. So the only real difference, aside from the speed that you can move at, is really the dry time. We did find that the 40-50 dries a little bit faster than the 40-30. So this is pretty dry. It's not bad, but I put this on a little bit wetter than I was able to with the 40-30, and even the edges of this, I just sprayed this. These edges are a little bit drier, faster. So really that's the only difference. You can see the performance from both products is very good, you know, being that the 40-50 is just a little bit thicker and slightly faster in terms of the film thickness dry. So we're going to clean this out. I'm going to go grab my next spray gun, and we're going to talk about candy2o with the spray gun. Okay, so we're back at the table, and we're going to talk about spray gun next. But before we do that, I just want to take a little segue back to these two panels. You can see that I was able to get a little bit heavier with the 40-50. And again, keep in mind, the reason I can do that is because it is a little bit thicker. So if you are going to use the 40-50, just keep in mind it's going to be a little bit slower, but you can adjust that, like we said, with bumping up and reduction, maybe another 5%, 10%, until you find that flow that you like. But in terms of dry, this is pretty dry, and so is this, the 40-50, but we do feel that it dries a little bit faster in terms of, this is the last panel I just sprayed, but this is already heavier than this, but it's already dry. So those are the only differences between the 40-50 and the 40-30 in terms of airbrush use. So now, moving on, we're going to go to the spray gun. For this demo, we're going to use the TH2. This is an awesome little gun. I love this gun. It's kind of right on the cusp of airbrush and spray gun, so it's kind of perfect for what we're trying to show. And this is probably the limit to where the 40-30 will be okay with this, but the 40-50 will be that much better. And once you graduate to a full-size gun, the 40-50 is way better in terms of what we feel, how our product sprays. So for big gun, we're recommending a 3-to-1 mix. It's a good starting point. So it's going to be 3 parts of our 40-50 and 3 parts of our 40-30 for each mix to 1 part of our candy2o. So I'm going to go ahead and get that mixed up right now. So I'm going to go 3 parts 40-30 for the first one. To 1 part candy2o. I have a little more paint in here, like we said before. You have to be a little more exacting once you're going to a larger application. So 10% now is going to look just like that. So I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to mix this up. Still the same procedure. It's no different. We want to let this mix for about a minute and then let it sit for about 10. So I'm going to do the same thing with my 40-50. We're going to do the same mix, 3-to-1. There's 3. To 1 part candy2o. And 10% 40-11. So we'll get this mixed up, we'll wait about 10 minutes, and we will start spraying. Okay, so we're back in the booth. It's been about 10 minutes. Everything's mixed up. I'm here with my little bad boy, the TH2. And I'm going to show you guys what the 4030 looks like when we spray it out of here. Biggest difference you'll see, you won't see it right now, but when I go to the 4050, you'll see it how much more material I can put on to make something even as opposed to the 4030. This is about as wet as I would want to get it. If you get anything heavier than that, you're going to start to see what we were talking about before about we call it scattering, surface tension. There's too much material and it has a tendency to run away from itself. We call it cratering as well. It'll build up the material too fast and it has a tendency to do that. The 4050 will alleviate that because it's got a little more body. So you can see this is drying up pretty good. I'm going to do another coat. See what happens when I get a little bit heavier. Now, I don't know if you can see, but on the edge, it's starting to do what we talked about. So if you did go too heavy, you would start to get these little imperfections in the surface where the 4030, because of the nature of the 4030, it's a little bit skinnier. It'll start to almost miniature fisheye. That's what we call the cratering, where it tends to have an uneven surface. So, I mean, this is like a medium wet coat. I mean, you would not want to go any wetter than that. Like this would be bad, I guess, if you were to go any wetter. So again, we say to work in layers, but we'll show you what the 4050 can do side by side with the 4030. So I'm going to get my gun cleaned out and we're going to put the 4050 in it. Okay, so we're back. I have the 4050 in my gun now, and I'm going to show you guys what this looks like. And the major difference in being I'm going to be able to get richer with the color without the issues, I guess you could say, that sometimes you have with the 4030. Just going to keep spraying. And again, we don't recommend to go wet on wet on wet, but the purpose of this is to show you the benefit of the 4050 when you start to move towards a bigger spray gun application. Now, again, I don't know if you guys can see it on the camera, but the evenness of the film build, the actual texture of the surface of the paint is a lot flatter than what we had with the 4030. Again, I don't recommend going this heavy, but this is just to illustrate how much more forgiving, I guess you could say, the 4050 is in terms of larger gun application. You can be a little bit more heavy-handed, I guess you could say, with the 4050 than you could with the 4030. I'm not even going to really wait for this to dry, but I'm going to just pass a little bit of air and I'm going to keep going. You guys can see that you won't have that tendency to skate or scatter the 4030 did. You can see I am moving a little bit slower. Again, that's because of the 4050 itself. It has more body than the 4030 does. But that's one of the reasons it holds the candy together better. I'm just going to keep going. And you can see this is really, really wet. Again, I don't recommend spraying that wet. But I can push the product a little harder with the 4050 than I could with the 4030. Okay, everyone, we're back in the booth. Everything is pretty much dry. We just want to do a quick recap on what we did. You can see a huge difference with the 4030 and the 4050 on these two panels. And keep in mind, again, I want to reiterate, the 4050 that I sprayed, this is way heavier than what we do recommend. But the purpose of that was to show you how much better the 4050 is suited to holding the candy together on a large spray gun application. I would never recommend going that wet, but if I were to go that wet, I even started here on the edge of this panel with the 4030, it just doesn't hold together as well as the 4050. So that's the major difference and why we say when you step to a large gun application, we recommend the 4050. On the airbrush side, these two, the 4030 and the 4050, again, you guys saw the performance was generally the same. Again, the 4050 being a little bit thicker in viscosity. The only other real difference that we did see is the 4030 dries a little bit more matte, so it has less of a shine. So sometimes that's what you're looking for in terms of what you're spraying. You can see here where it is a little bit heavier because of the nature of the product, the 4050, it is a little bit glossier. So there is a little bit more of a shine. You're able to go a little bit heavier again with the 4050, but that's really the only difference. So for application in an airbrush, they're basically the same product. Just keep in mind that because of the viscosity of the 4050, you might have to adjust depending on the airbrush that you're spraying. You know, going up in 5% increments, maybe 15% to 20%, that's not a bad thing to do when you're using it in an airbrush application. But once you step up to the large gun, spray gun, we do like that 10% limit, sometimes even 5%, especially when you're mixing with candy because the nature of the candy is thin already. So sometimes just the candy itself will make it thin enough for you to spray, but 5% to 10%, 10% is that threshold. You don't want to exceed the 10%. So hopefully this helped you guys out and answered some questions you might have. I'm Chris Arpin with Createx Colors, and we'll see you next time.